Okay, on the 21st of this month, an opinion piece was written by Dr. John C. Hulsman, where he said that India remains a rising power despite its COVID-19 tragedy. This piece, it was widely quoted by several leaders of BJP, even some ministers, and it also came in for a considerable amount of criticism, to the extent that some people even questioned Dr. Hulsman, asking why someone with a very limited Twitter following should be commenting on India's affairs. Why should we take his opinion on India continuing to remain a rising power? So let's put all of these questions to Dr. Hulsman himself. Dr. Hulsman, thanks very much for speaking to us here on Times Now. First of all, were you taken aback or surprised by the kind of reception that your opinion got?
No, but as to the Twitter point, this is a sign of the times we live in. I'm not going to recite to you my CV, but all the guy would have had to do would be go to Google, put my name into it, and he'd see that I'm a life member of the Council on Foreign Relations. I won one of the most successful political risk firms in the world. I've written over 1,000 articles. I've traveled the world giving advice to businesses and governments about political risk everywhere. And because I don't use Twitter like the Kardashian family does not necessarily mean my life has no meaning.
Well, you're right. It is a sign of the times that we live in. But coming to your opinion itself, what makes you confident that India is going to bounce back, or rather it is going to continue to rise despite the hits that we've taken because of COVID?
Well, I mean, this is it. The piece, and really what political risk analysis is there to do, is to separate the immediate, and the immediate is absolutely tragic. I love India, been studying it most of my life, and I have nothing but my prayers to all of you. It's a terrible situation. But take the immediate out and look at what's profound. And what's profound is why India will remain a great power, a rising power, as it has been in the past, the present, and the future. There are three basic reasons for this. One, India has remarkable political stability. The Modi government was vindicated, and I wrote this, and a lot of people got very angry. And by vindicated, I mean in a Jeffersonian sense. Winning re-election is being vindicated. Winning the approbation of the people is indeed being vindicated. And India has a stable majority in the parliament. Most of the BJP at the state government level, the BJP and its allies control more than half of the state governments, and the Congress party is in utter disarray, as it has been for quite a while, and so this political stability is likely to continue. It's profoundly important. Second, perhaps the most important thing that almost nobody talks about is India is an incredibly young country. Demography is destiny, and 50% of Indians are under the age of 25. 65% are under the age of 35. If you think about catch-up growth, which is how societies boom economically, India is the only major world economy with catch-up growth ahead of it. Japan is elderly. China is going to get old before it gets rich. Europe is sclerotic. The United States is even slowing down, and its demography is beginning to level out. But India alone, Russia even worse shape, India alone is in a position to have 20 years of catch-up growth with a modicum of responsible government. It's just there waiting to happen. And third, the economy. The IMF just came out with new numbers. India is set to bounce back from its cratered COVID year that everyone in the world has had, to grow at around 11.5%. The only major economy in the world to grow at double digits. Even if this number is wrong, India will be the largest growing major economy in the future. So if you look at economics, demography, and politics, the big, profound things that don't change day to day to day, India is the rising power for the next generation.
What do you think is the most important factor of this all? Our demographic dividend, the fact that we have historically had stability as a country, or the current leadership?
I think it's the first two. And I mean, I'm not denigrating the current leadership in any way. I mean, as Napoleon said about his marshals, I hope they're good, but they must be lucky. The Modi government is lucky to inherit India with these profoundly important structural advantages. But indeed, of course, these could change. Human agency can ruin them. But if India has moderately better government, moderately pro-business government, moderately competent government going forward, and nothing that's happened changes these three basic facts, India will emerge as a great power. But these underlying facts of the macroeconomics, the political stability that you rightly mentioned, which is really a fundamental point about India that isn't true about many of the other rising powers in the world, where we spend all our time worrying about the politics overturning that society. Nobody worries about that in India. The Congress Party has been in government for most of India's history. If it were to come back, India would continue along. The BJP, if it's in power as it is, India will continue to trundle along. It's these underlying factors of demography, economics, and stable politics that really are the secret to this engine taking off.
But will this stability in politics continue any further for a variety of reasons? One, we have our elections expected in just 3 years from now. Two, most of the opposition and international media seems to be of the opinion that this is the worst crisis of the Modi government, and the next 3 years he may face not only a lot of opposition from the various political parties, but also the anger of the people. Do you think all of these factors combined could hit that stability you spoke of?
It could, and we, of course, in my firm watch this. This is exactly what I do with my day job. We watch this every single minute. But so far, no, there's a lot of wish fulfillment about this because the Modi government is not popular abroad or among the media commentariat in India, indeed. And so there's a lot of wish fulfillment here. People thought that in the May 2019 elections that Modi would, if he won, would have a diminution in his power, would come back with fewer seats. We did not think that at my political risk firm because we actually talk to Indians on the ground. We do an incredible amount of research and came to the conclusion that his majority would be strengthened, and it was. And so, yes, is COVID the greatest crisis for the Modi government? Absolutely, you're right, it is. It's the greatest crisis for every government in the world right now. This is the biggest single historical event of the last generation. And of course that could upset any government. But moving forward, Modi goes into dealing with the crisis with this huge economic bounce back, according to the IMF, in his favor, with the demography in his favor, which is a long-term issue that doesn't change very much, and with a huge political support base at the moment. Could he fritter that away? Of course, human agency allows for that. But frankly, the odds are in his favor for these other reasons that he's inherited and has not yet gummed up.
So you're saying he still has a largely public opinion in his favor. Does it have to do with what you called his Hindu nationalism, which at times, and I'm quoting you, morphs into Hindu chauvinism? Is that the reason that his support base continues despite the crisis?
I think that's part of it. I think, and as I said, yes, that it's Hindu nationalism. Occasionally people around him, and morphs into chauvinism, which of course I'm against. But being a nationalist is a rather popular thing to be. I am an American nationalist, even though I live in Europe. I wish the United States nothing but well moving ahead for all its many problems, which I acknowledge. And so to be a nationalist in a country is a very good thing, I think, politically to begin with. The other thing that Modi has going for him is the utter disarray of Congress. What does it stand for now? Anything other than a certain class of people used to ruling? What is it actually going out there to do? It takes two to tango. The people may be looking for another dance partner, but Congress has to give them reasons that we venerated for reasons other than having to do with India's great history. What is it doing for it now in a post-COVID world? If I were a Congress member, that's all I would be thinking about, because unless they put forward an alternative that looks like it might succeed, and they are way down in terms of numbers in the Lok Sabha, as you know, way down. Unless they come up with a profound thing, it will take an election or two for things to change. So Modi has this cushion politically. I think Congress has 52 seats at the moment. Modi's allies over 300. It probably will take several elections in a parliamentary system for that to change. And that gives Modi breathing room to get things right and keep the stability going.
As of today, do you think that Congress will be able to give people the dancing partner that they need in the next election, or they're still suffering from a syndrome of two left feet?
I think that I love the two left feet. I may steal that from you for my next piece. I think that at the moment they're in utter disarray. I think I'm stealing that with no attribution. I think at the moment they have two left feet. I think they're in utter disarray. I've talked to Congress people many, many times in India and without. And they don't seem to understand their raison d'etre, what it is that they stand for now in the new era that we live in. Modi understands that coming up from nothing, his narrative, his biography, is another potent advantage that he has, and that stays with him, and is genuine. The Congress Party just giving it to the next son. I mean, it's a peculiarly feudal system in a modern country. And I think that that's fine, but Mr. Gandhi has to come forward with a reason for Congress to exist in the post-COVID world. I don't see it yet. We watch for these things constantly. It would be better for India, like it would be for any country, if both parties were competitive and on their game. That only sharpens things in a democracy, as Mr. Jefferson would say. I don't think we're there yet. I certainly hope that happens, but at the moment, I'd say 2 left feet is a pretty accurate analysis.
As somebody who's an American living in Europe and looking at India, how would you evaluate the handling of the COVID crisis by the 3 governments? And if I may ask, would you rate, if you were to rate the 3 of them, how would that ranking go?
I don't know that I'd rank them together, but I certainly can do a narrative of them. They've all made terrible mistakes, and they were all, and I think we forget this, presented with an absolutely unprecedented, terrible situation. And so hindsight is 20/20, and it's easy to take cheap shots afterwards. The Americans, in typical American fashion, got all the analytical things wrong, as we tend to do. But once the American infrastructure gets going, as happened in World War II, we weren't prepared for the war. We weren't prepared for the Indo-Pacific and what the Japanese did to us for 6 to 9 months. But once the American infrastructure gets going, it is indeed a wonder to behold. The vaccination rates have been incredibly gratifying. That did start under President Trump, ironically, who doesn't get enough credit for that. But Joe Biden then continued this along, and the American rate of vaccination is now over 50%, which has been a wonderful comeback and bounce back. And you see that in the economic numbers, that although somewhat worrying, are certainly better than in other places in the world. So slow start, good catch up, I think is what I'd say about America. Europe, catastrophic start. The EU, in typical fashion, was, as my grandmother would put it, penny wise and pound foolish. They were arguing with big pharma over the prices to a matter of sense and not locking in contracts. And as a result, the EU had a shortage. And in typical Brussels fashion, they blamed everyone but themselves for a crisis that was of their own making. But again, now they're in gear and they're beginning to catch up, and the vaccination numbers are in the 20% range, up from catastrophic to bad. But I do think that over the summer, Europe will open up. The summer is vital for holidays. I live in Italy, and without a good summer holiday, half of Italy would close. I think they'll have that holiday toward the end, and things will look much better come, say, September. The wave of the cycle in India is entirely different, as you know, that having gotten through the first wave, I think the government was too triumphalist. Obviously, it was relieved that things, got better. And I certainly understand Prime Minister Modi's desire not to close all of India down, because that could be catastrophic. He doesn't want to throw people into absolute poverty. Entirely understandable. We're weighing 2 goods here, and it's a risk on both sides. And I've said this probably 300 times during the pandemic to various clients. On the one hand, you want to stop the deaths. On the other hand, you don't want to so cripple your society that it can't recover. The rates of education have been terribly affected in the West. The rates of child abuse, the rates of suicide, alcoholism, these things we don't think about as being related are, of course, entirely related. And it's balancing these ills to get to the next step that's the key. All these factors I've laid out for the Modi government are good. The demography, the economic bounce back is certainly going to help a great deal. I think that we just have to be very clear. The cycle is different, and move forward from there.
Final question to you. You mentioned the IMF's estimate of the Indian economy growing at 11.5%. However, this was a figure before the second wave hit us. Keeping that in mind, and also the fact that largely, I think, barring you, the international media has been very, very critical, not just of Mr. Modi's handling of the pandemic, but also our future prospects. Would you do a rethink, given that you right now seem to be quite an exception to the rule of all of international media not having a very good opinion of our future?
Well, again, I don't think international media know very much about India, and arrogantly enough, I think I do. I got the Brexit, I called Brexit correctly, when literally every other media outlet said that it would never happen because they only talked to their friends in London who voted to remain. You have to get outside of your own bubble and look at the world. And that's what my firm does. We don't go to cocktail parties, we do analysis. I love cocktail parties, but with my friends. No, I wouldn't change it at all. The demography is enduring, the political stability is enduring. And yes, the macroeconomic number will probably come down from the IMF estimate. But if it comes in at 8 to 9% or even 10, this will be the greatest number of any great power in the world. I stand by the fact that 20 years from now, India will be the rising power in the world.
Well, as an India watcher, I'm sure you'll be familiar with the phrase, "Aapke muh mein ghee shakkar." Thank you very much. We hope your optimism does, in fact, endure and come true. Thank you very much, sir, for having spoken to Times Now. That's it then, viewers, from me on this edition of the News Hour Agenda. See you tomorrow.